Okay, I'm going to get our second session started. Just wait for everyone to rejoin. So our second panel will be initiated with a presentation from Anna Markopoulou. She has a PhD in science education from Sorbonne University. She is currently a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Cultural Technology and Communication at the University of the Aegean in Greece. And you can go ahead and start your presentation. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for your excellent presentation. Good evening from Athens. The aim of my proposal is to highlight the conceptual power of the desert, and especially how this philosophical concept evolved into new modes of thinking, non-dualistic, and above all, non-anthropocentric. In this light, I will analyze two concepts of two philosophers which highlight this evolution of the philosophical concept of desert. The concept of the desert nature of the German philosopher Ludvig Klages and the concept of the desert islands of the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze. From this point of view, the work of Klages, entitled Man and Earth, 1913, that is undoubtedly the first modern ecological manifesto, through which its author highlighted as a pioneer of ecological thinking, can be considered as representative of a dualistic and anthropocentric approach of the desert nature. On the contrary, the work of Deleuze, entitled Desert Islands and Other Texts, 1953 to 1974, can be considered as representative of a non-dualistic and non-anthropocentric approach of the desert through the philosophical concept of desert islands, which I argue that constitutes an evolution towards a new mode of thinking, and consequently a paradigm shift towards a critical post-human approach of the desert. In this context, Klages' perception of the desert nature draws its origin from a philosophy of life, Lebensphilosophy, according to which the desertification of nature is the result of man's alienation from the rest of nature. More specifically, Klages' anthropocentric perception of the desert nature is based on a dualistic opposition between human and nature. This first opposition highlights, in turn, a second dualistic opposition between the human spirit and the cosmic soul, an opposition which draws its origin from the German philosophy of life mentioned above, which perceive the human spirit or the human reason as a power that destroys the world of life. From this point of view, it is interesting to note that Klages used the German term Geist, spirit, in the sense of human mind and rational thought, i.e., as the purely rational aspect of human, which stand in contrast to the cosmic soul, Seele. The cosmic soul is part of a vitalistic conception of life, and in this sense, it is the one that connects human with the universal element of life. But what is life according to Klages. Klages' conception of life is, in my opinion, anthropocentric, since he reduces the Darwinian struggle for life exclusively to the human species, while nature is, according to him, completely Edenic. From this point of view, this conception highlights a dualistic opposition between human life, seen as the product of a Darwinian evolution, and therefore approached in the light of history, and natural life, seen as Edenic, and in this sense, it is approached under the aspect of eternity. As Klages states in his work entitled Man and Earth, nature knows no struggle for survival, but only the struggle that springs from the concern for life. Many insects die after copulation, proof that nature is not so much interested in survival. It is enough, of course, that the wave of life spreads in similar forms. It is the need of hunger that drives one animal to hunt and kill another, not consumerism, ambition, the desire for power. An abyss opens here that no development logic can bridge. This dualistic conception is, in my opinion, purely anthropocentric, since both human life and natural life are approached by Klages under the human perspective, in other words, under the human point of view, which contrasts human and non-human through the opposition of the historical life of human and the Edenic life of nature. As Klages states in his work, the same work mentioned above, the magnificent monotony of the desert, the magnificence of the mountain range, the haunting sadness of the westerland, the mysterious mesh of the alpine forest, the rhythmic pulse of sea-swept coastlines are integral chords of the music of the planets. Humans' primeval achievements were incorporated or remained dreamily entwined with these chords. Recapitulating what I have mentioned so far, I would say that in Klages' work, a double meaning, positive and negative, of the desert emerges, which constitutes, in turn, an opposite dipole, that of Edenic nature, which is, however, also a desert, the magnificent monotony of the desert, and that of the desert nature, which is a product of a desertification that arises as the result of man's alienation from the rest of nature. However, both the positive and negative meanings of desert converge towards a negative connotation, since they have in common the absence or denial of human life, and in any case, the distance that separates them from anything human. This is precisely where Klages' anthropocentric perception of the desert nature emerges, perception which draws its origin from a radical dualism between human and non-human, between life and non-life, and above all, between human and nature. On the other hand, Deleuze's perception of the desert aims at overcoming the dualism of human and non-human, life and non-life, through the concept of desert islands, which has not a negative connotation, but a positive one, based in a non-anthropocentric, critical post-human conception, according to which islands are either from before or for after humankind. Desert islands and other texts 1953 to 1974. So let's see right from the start how Deleuze defines the concept of desert in his work entitled Dialogues, Gilles Deleuze and Claire Parnet. But already the desert is a body without organs, which has never been hostile to the groups who people it. In this context, Deleuze highlights a non-anthropocentric conception of desert, since he considered it to be a post-human body without organs that coexist harmoniously with humans. This conception of desert as a post-human body without organs presupposes, in turn, an enlarged and non-anthropocentric conception of life, which is the result of Deleuze's perception of a fundamentally inorganic vitality. In this light, French philosopher not only transcends the dualism between life and non-life, but infinitely expands the boundaries of life, which includes not only organic, but also inorganic matter. As Deleuze states in his work entitled Pour parler, there is a deep connection between science, the event, life, vitalism. It is the power of a non-organic life, that one that can be in a line of drawing, writing, or music. It is the organism that die, not life. There is no work that does not indicate a way out of life, that does not trace a path between the paving stones. Everything I wrote was vitalist, at least I hope so, and constituted a theory of science and the event. In this context, I argue that the concept of desert islands is a concrete example of the Deleuzian conception of desert as a post-human body without organs that is characterized by an inorganic vitality, which, in turn, comes from an elan, that creates it and unfolds in a movement which precedes the human, who repeats it. As Deleuze states in his work mentioned above, Desert Islands. An island doesn't stop being deserted simply because it is inhabited. While it is true that the movement of humans toward the end on the island takes up the movement of the island prior to humankind. Some people can occupy the island. It is still deserted, all the more so, provided they are sufficiently, that is, absolutely separate, and provided they are sufficient absolute creators. Only in appearance does such a movement put an end to the island desertedness. In reality, it takes up and prolongs the elan that produced the island as deserted. In certain conditions which attach them to the very movement of things, humans do not put an end to the desertness, they make it sacred. But what does this elan consist of that creates the inorganic vitality of desert islands and unfolds them in a movement which precedes the human? It consists, according to the French philosopher, in a double movement, a movement of separation and a movement of recreation. As he stated in his work entitled Desert Islands and Other Texts, the elan that draws human towards islands extends the double movement that produces islands in themselves. Dreaming of islands is dreaming of pulling away, of being already separated, far from any continent, of being lost and alone, or it is dreaming of starting from scratch, recreating, beginning anew. Certainly, separating and creating are not mutually exclusive. One has to hold one's own when one is separated, and had better be separated to create anew. Nevertheless, one of the two tendencies always predominates. From this point of view, Deleuze argues that the essence of the desert islands is imaginary and not actual, mythological and not geographical, and what must be recovered is the mythological life of the desert islands. And it is precisely this mythological life that makes the desert islands post-human places of an itching eternal return, which, however, in the light of Deleuzian philosophy, turn out to be at the same time sacred places of an eternal repetition and difference, which is located in the concept of reinitiation. As Deleuze states in his work entitled Desert Islands and Other Texts, it is not enough that everything began. Everything must begin again once the cycle of possible combination has come to completion. The second moment does not succeed the first. It is the reappearance of the first when the cycle of the other moments has been completed. The second origin is thus more essential than the first, since it gives us the law of repetition, the law of the series, whose first origin gave us only moments. This second origin of the world is more important than the first. It is a sacred island. The idea of a second origin gives the deserted island its whole meaning, the survival of a sacred place in a world that is slow to re-begin. In the ideal of beginning anew, there is something that precedes the beginning itself, that takes it up to deepen it and delight in the passage of time. The desert island is the material of this something immemorial, this something most profound. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Anna, for your wonderful presentation. We can take questions and comments at the end of the second panel. So we will go ahead and move on to the next presentation, which is by Evie Sampanikou. Evie Sampanikou is a professor of art history and visual culture in the Department of Cultural Technology and Communication at the University of the Aegean. Since 2009, she has been an active participant in the international development of posthumanism. She's a founding member of the Beyond Humanism conference series, and she is the editor of several books, including the Posthuman Studies Reader, Core Readings on Transhumanism, Posthumanism, and Metahumanism, and Audiovisual Posthumanism. The title of her presentation is Remarks on the Notion of the Post-Apocalyptic Desert in Science Fiction, Comics, and Films. Thank you, Evie.
Thank you, Natasha. Among several philosophers, writers, and scientists who have offered their lights on the shaping of a contemporary notion of the desert, Aldous Huxley, not accidentally the grandson of the biologist and pioneer of post-human ideas, Thomas Henry Huxley, has been one of the founders of science fiction and a visionary of a post-apocalyptic future. His Brave New World in 1932 opened a vast area of discussion on future dystopias that can signify the end of the human race. On a deserted world that has been the outcome of human arrogance and human-focused thought. After Huxley's book, a lot of artists tried to shape futuristic images of several dystopias on a scenery of ravaged urban landscapes and deadly polluted nature. I will focus on the collaboration of image and discourse by taking the examples of a series of movies and comics and graphic novels of the 80s and later that have strongly influenced our present sense of the post-apocalyptic desert. For example, the Mad Max films, Judge Dredd's comics, first of all, and cinema, not very successful there. The series of Jodorowsky and Moebius in Cal, graphic novels, and many others that will be also included in the paper. My main intention is to show how much contemporary postmodern and posthuman philosophy has interacted with visual culture and artistic and literary approaches of a major symbolic content related to the notion of the desert that is here presented as a post-apocalyptic consequence of humanism. But let's go back to the notion of the desert. The desert has always had various interpretations in literature and philosophy throughout human history as both in literal and metaphorical space in different cultural and socio-political contexts. In most spiritual or religious traditions, it acquires the meaning of being purified in the real desert through a series of trials that finally bring awakening, enlightenment, or revelation. And there are so many sacred texts that have revealed in time this awakening, like the Christian Bible and all the Desert Fathers, Sufi texts, Sufi mysticism, Hebrew books, Buddhist, Hinduist, Islamic religious books. They all deal with the desert. This is the place to realize human vulnerability, actually, the power of nature and the grandeur of God, and to transform through the detachment from all material commitments. Therefore, isolation in the desert becomes the medium of inner serenity, to feel and communicate with divine presence, to meditate, despite the temptations that might appear. The desert is sometimes a dangerous place also, where the battle between the good and the evil can be eternal, is eternal, and you also must fight to be on the good side. You have already spoken a lot, the previous speakers, about Friedrich Nietzsche and last book, Zarathustra. Therefore, I will not insist on Nietzsche's notion that's here, but he's actually the first to return to the religious understanding of the desert. Throughout the 19th and the early 20th century, then, under the influence of colonial ideas and Orientalist imagery in art and literature, the notion of the desert acquires kind of exotic sense and at the same time a bit idealistic for the West as a symbolic baptism, something like that. This imagery, from what I can recall right now, is reflected in the epic Lawrence of Arabia, for example. I'm talking about the famous 1962 film, and it is famous mainly for the director David Lean's exciting cinematography, focusing on several scenes on capturing the image and meaning of the desert in a form of cold grandeur, enclosing human passions and struggles. The desert has both faces in the film, the dangerous and the place of the birth. It is in post-colonial times that Edward Said, in Orientalism, develops a critical look over all the Western colonial depictions of the exoticism of the East, including the image of the desert as a place of uncontrolled passions that should only be tamed by the Western gates. Modernity has symbolically treated the desert as a big void that is the outcome of a loss of identity, rather. That is why in both literature and philosophy, the notion of the desert emerges as a form of existential crisis. And we can see that in Wasteland, in Eliot's Wasteland, actually referring to a literal collapse after the First World War, and during that period. And we can say that the same thing happened with Dadaism, for example, an art movement. And of course, it is in Heidegger's later work, but we have already discussed, Natasha has referred to Heidegger. So I think that I should go on by just mentioning Sartre and existentialism, that he actually confronts the meaning of the desert, as I understand it, at least, as a tabula rasa of existence, on which individuals must build their own identity, values, their own purpose of life. Anna has already referred to Deleuze and Guattari. I have very much focused on Thousand Plateaus for exploring the notion of the desert there and combining it with contemporary imagery. I also have to mention the well-known Slavoj Zizek's text, Welcome to the Desert of the Real, that is a point of presenting a new paradigm shift and a turn to posthumanism after postmodernism. It is, of course, other famous texts in general, like Matrix, that can also refer to, it is also referring to the notion of the desert in several ways. Of course, Matrix brought us the comparison with Wonderland and all this. I need to mention here a famous book series, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where actually the desert is the absence of land. It's a travel through deserted planets, devastated planets, very humoristic travel, of course. And the desert is actually the absence of Earth that has already been destroyed, no matter if it will be reconstructed in the next book. Therefore, the desert is a recurring motif in post-apocalyptic science fiction and comics, symbolizing the desolation and harshness in that world that has appeared after the collapse of society and all survivals getting into being wild. So in a series of science fiction books, chaotic desert lands already describe this, have already described this image. Dangerous unknown places. I will mention Dune. You have already, I think, yes, Frank Herbert's Dune, the book first and then the films. But I'm going to move on in the films of the 80s. In many post-apocalyptic worlds, the desert often results from ecological disasters. Nuclear war, extreme climate change, or sometimes we don't know what happened, but we suppose it was something like that. And of course, an overexploitation of the Earth's resources. The landscape becomes hostile, becomes barren, and reflects the fact that human arrogance, human negligence has ravaged the environment. A very good series to think about it is the whole series of Mad Max films from 1979 to 2015. I always love the first films. That's why Mad Max 1, the first appearance of Mad Max, is my favorite here. And Mad Max is also a predecessor of Terminator in from many aspects. Where it is the societal collapse I mentioned earlier is depicted in the clearest way. Everything has collapsed. The survivors are outlaws, actually. There are mutants. There is mutant slavery everywhere. There are bikers like Hell's Angels everywhere. Sorry, lost something, I think. Matter. I omitted something. And all is about survival in the film. The desert, we can see a lot of desert in the Mad Max films. What is the desert here? It is a physical and symbolic at the same time representation of the whole breakdown of the society. Actually, it is a breakdown that seems nihilistic at times. However, it can also bring just a little hope. In this dystopian future, everything, all the world of Mad Max features vast empty deserts where water and fuel are the most valuable necessities, and gangs battle between them for water control and resources control. The water is important in another, it's still Mad Max, several films here. The issue of the water is also mentioned as in another form of post-apocalyptic fiction, in Tank Girl, the comics, where she fights for the few remaining sources of water. And that it is the main fact that makes survival difficult and makes you struggle for getting to the resources that keep you alive. There are other works like the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Stephen King here mixes up the aesthetics of the Old West. It's like a Western punk genre. And in this way, he gives another imagery of how the deserted future societies would be. Another film series is the Book of Eli, where also the topic is survival. Humans must fight natural conditions and the other survivors in a continuous challenge of everything. Actually, in this movie, the landscape, the extremely barren landscape, is mirroring the main character's spiritual journey, where he, through this journey, he understands that survival also depends on faith, and also depends on spiritual powers. So the desert is a symbol of the decay of human civilization, and the main hero is the one who struggles to keep distances from this decay and transform and be reborn. The same goes for Akira. I think everyone knows. Sorry, I've lost Akira. It's here. The same goes for Akira, where the desert becomes a city. I'm going to also comment on the cities, the post-apocalyptic cities, and the several mega cities that are also the other face of the desert in science fiction movies and poems. Here, the post-apocalyptic Tokyo seems ruined, seems deserted, and there are everywhere striking contrasts between the world that was before and the dystopian now, the dystopian presence. It is, however, that the desert in post-apocalyptic fiction can also symbolize a hope of restart. The renewal is often signified with courses, journeys through the desert, across the desert, where the characters pass the obstacles, pass through the wilderness, to find this salvation they're seeking for. An example could be The Walking Dead, for example. Yes, but I'm returning to an interesting European paradigm of the 80s, not exactly European because Jodorowsky is Chilean. The Black and Color series. Here, Jodorowsky illustrates in a very humoristic way at the same time a huge dystopia that might be the human future. The city setting is this environment where you can feel impersonified somehow, Power structures are enforced by brutal police forces. Poverty is rampant among the two worlds, an upper world where the few lucky people live and shine, and the lower world of the crime and disease. Our protagonist here is John the Fool, a rather fool detective, but is not so fool, as we finally discovered, who is living the city's atmosphere in surrealistic adventures that reveal this emptiness and despair. This is a famous picture from the first album, the Incal, the Incal Noir. John the Fool is beaten and thrown from the upper levels of the city by a gang into the suicide the plus of suicide, where it is a habit in this world. The desperate can jump and be dissolved in acid, and it becomes a spectacle and a sport because others are shooting at them while they're falling to melt into the acid. But of course, our hero is lucky enough to be saved at the last moment. The wonders described in this dystopian world have a special artistic approach by both the authors of this series, and the desert plays a protagonistic role, and it's always a desert versus the city, and the desert can hide dangers or surprises, but is much more appreciated as a place for humans that should be in the lower ranks in the city to live. Amazing pictures. But let's move to Judge Red. Well, the fame of Judge Red, the series that is running for 30 years and more, in one of them also. I believe most of you know Dredd, and who is Dredd and what is a judge in that future, in that dystopian future. A judge is at the same time a person that judges and enforces the law. So in Mega City 1, one of the vast cities in the future where the human race has survived in similar cities while the rest of the earth is devastated. The judges are powerful because they are actually the law and order of the future. There's a big, of course, this is completely inhuman environment and violent to live in, and full of crime, and the judges have to be very cruel at times to execute criminals. The character of Judge Dredd was conceived by Brian Boland, who well, I've been lucky enough I had the opportunity to have met him years ago. But you can find online several of his interviews. For Dredd, he said that he had initially thought of a fascist low representative in a fascist environment for the future. However, the character acquired an autonomous course and he actually began to be funny character too. And he actually began to have the liberty to not enforce the law when his judgment permitted him. So he became more human than the designer and the designer had originally thought. One of the famous adventures of Dread, and the rather symbolic one, is the Cursed Earth and the quest for the Judge's Kid. It is a huge story in which Judge Dredd is sent to the Cursed Earth, and a vast desert of crime, of mutant slavery we have already seen in earlier works, to find the kid that will be, according to a prophecy, the greatest judges of all. He wanders through the devastated areas in where he meets. He's getting captured. Of course, he's strong enough to free himself. He is getting into touch with very strange religions, criminals, castes, mutants. And when he finally gets through all this paranoia, through all this madness, and all these deformed creatures that it's difficult to say from time at times if they belong to the human race, he and wandering through the deserts to mega city, to the mega city, and so on. Continuing his quest, because it is his mission. This is the kid. Owen Chrysler is his name. He's the protagonist, but he appears in very few moments of the story, actually. It has oracle powers. Owen Chrysler has oracle powers, and he can be recognized by an eagle sign on his forehead. Dredd finds him captured by a gang, and when he's about to say that his mission is fulfilled and return to Mega City 1 with the one that will be the great judge of all, he realizes that the child has a complete lack of any sensitivity to other beings, and is vastly mean. He's very cruel. So he takes a personal decision. He leaves him back. So you can see the frame here, the kid desperate shouts to Dredd to come back. But Dredd decides never to come back again. And he decides that the mission has fallen because he has decided that it must be like that. Sorry, it won't take long. I saw that you
Yeah, I just
reappeared.
wanted to give you a warning that you had a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. So I just want to mention to refer to the comparison between the mega cities and the deserts. They look very different but actually they are the two faces of the same coin in such environments and such dystopian futures. So the desert becomes a post-human topic, and we can see that we can have an early glimpse of early post-humanism in Metropolis, for example, Fridland Metropolis. Of course, I don't imply that Metropolis is a post-humanist in 1927, but there is something in it. in the Blade Runner films, that actually the topic turns into becoming human, and becoming is actually the topic of so many of these films. In Blade Runner especially, it is that humanity, what is transmitted is the feeling that humanity is getting small, is getting lost, is getting alienated, and is questioning the fact, what is it to be human? Among crime, paranoia, replicants, and people who think they're humans, but they may not be. I think I can stop here, and the rest will be in the discussion.
Thank you, Evie. Our next presentation is by Marius Markuckas. He has a master's degree in comparative politics and a PhD in philosophy from Vilnius University in Lithuania. He went on at Vilnius University to teach as a professor of philosophy from 2023 to 2024. His research interests include social philosophy, political philosophy, transhumanism, and bioethics. The title of his paper is Desert Simulation and Reality. Thank you, Marius.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I have to apologize because my internet connection today is really weak, I guess due to bad weather conditions in Lithuania. And my computer screen is freezing, so I can barely hear you sometimes, but I hope that you can hear me better. So just let me know if you can't hear me or something like that. So to begin this talk of mine, I would first like to direct your attention towards what I already noted in the abstract of this paper, and what Natasha noted in the beginning of this wonderful event, precisely that postmodern philosophy, from the works of Friedrich Nietzsche to those of Jean Baudrillard, is accompanied by an image of a desert intended to describe the phenomenon of reality. This image emphasizes the anti-metaphysical character of or nature of reality, or highlights its epistemological mirage-like character as well as ontological simulativeness. One could reasonably state that the aforementioned image is a specific expression of the modern radical doubt regarding the realness of reality that has been the principal philosophical problem since at least the time of René Descartes. Within the contemporary philosophical discourse of transhumanism specifically, the aforementioned radical doubt was embodied originally in the simulation argument presented by Nick Bostrom in the beginning of this millennium. In the widely academically acclaimed article titled "Are We Living in a Computer Simulation?", Bostrom states that there exists a substantial possibility that humans are existing in a computer simulation. The idea of simulated reality remains intensely debated to this day, and the most substantial proof of it was provided relatively recently in 2022 in the book Reality Plus, written by the prominent philosopher of consciousness, David Chalmers. In this work, Chalmers also speaks of how we are possibly existing within a simulated virtual reality. So, as we can see, this argument is still as relevant as ever. In fact, in the light of the rapid emergence of all sorts of techno powers, especially that of artificial intelligence, I would say it is becoming more relevant than ever. Today, I won't endeavor to consider the question of whether we are truly living in a computer simulation, unlike the thinkers I mentioned previously. This is primarily because I don't think this question is all that important looking from a purely philosophical point of view. I mean, the question of the relation between reality and computer simulation specifically. Furthermore, I believe that the adjective computer, as it is used here, is nothing more than a redundant complication of an old and as of yet unsolved philosophical problem, that of the relation between reality and simulation. Since the latter problem is truly fundamental and multifaceted, I would formulate it in the context of this paper as the following question. Even if we are to assume that our reality is indeed a simulation, does this inevitably mean that there is no objective or metaphysical foundation underlying it, or objective reality itself? Well, answering the question of what is reality proved too difficult a task even to the greatest of wise men throughout the past 2 millennia. So it would be quite wise to not attempt to answer this question in the remaining few of my allotted minutes, right? But things are much simpler when it comes to simulation, however. It is sufficient to know that the essential purpose of a simulation, whatever it is, including computer ones, of course, is simply to simulate. As you likely know, this word is derived from the Latin simulationem, nominative form of simulatio, which in turn refers to imitation, feigning, and hypocrisy. The question raised by Bostrom on whether it is likely that we are living in a computer simulation is undoubtedly interesting and valuable in its own right. But nevertheless, we must also admit that the very question regarding the simulativeness of reality is neither new nor original, in spite of the fact that it was both formulated and expressed in various philosophical ways. So this is clearly attested to by the entire history of Western philosophy, actually. Descartes has already been mentioned, but this question was also present in the efforts of the pre-Socratics to find arche within diverse worldly phenomena. Plato's asserted necessity to cognize the eidos in order to overcome the shadowness of the cave inherent to this world, as well as Immanuel Kant's attempts at separating the noumena from the phenomena. Obviously, all these philosophical efforts were based on the principal notion that beyond all this simulational facade characteristic of our reality, undoubtedly lies something real, or at least more real. And this strong belief is clearly reflected in our own current scientific worldview. One does not need to converse with a prudent metaphysicist about the true appearance of this world to seriously doubt what one considers to be real is, in fact, some strange mirage or simulation. A conversation with a physicist capable of vividly explaining the main tenets of quantum physics, for example, will definitely suffice. So let me ask you here, what is so special about computer simulation, consider it from the perspective of this real, not real doubt, worldly doubt, which has been in the purview of philosophy since the very beginning of it? Well, nothing, if you ask me, except maybe for the fact that the experience of being inside of a computer simulation would most likely be accompanied by more vivid empirical images and a much more radical fear of unrealness. And first and foremost, the unrealness of the self, precisely because of our perceived radical artificiality and absolute predetermination. But on the other hand, these questions, even without such intense fears, have also been already raised in the philosophical tradition in various theistic and deistic visions of the human and the world. So there is nothing essentially new under the sun, except maybe that we have lost that peace and calm that comes with knowing or wishing that one's own fate, as well as that of the entire universe, is determined and controlled by a wise and benevolent God, but not some crazy post-humanist hacker, and that you yourself are not locked inside some claustrophobic computer box. And yet, insofar as we admit that reality has a deeper basis than what is manifested to and understood by us, which is acknowledged by both philosophy and different religions, we also admit that reality may be surrounded by a thinner or thicker layer of simulation, a sort of a veil of Maya that prevents us from seeing or perceiving the reality as it is. However, those who are worrying too much about it can rest assured that this does not mean that reality doesn't exist or that there is no metaphysical basis for what we call reality. This also applies in the case of reality as a computer simulation. Elementary logic alone clearly indicates that simulation is simply impossible without a simulated object. Bostrom emphasizes this fact too by noting that in the perspective of computer simulation, reality must thus contain many levels, while simultaneously not denying the very idea of reality and its existence. In other words, simulation can have various forms, but cannot not have a starting point, conceptual, material, spiritual, or otherwise, and this also applies even in cases of simulated simulations. So, a starting point must exist. It would seem that Chalmers, with all his considerations of virtual reality, is inclined to go one step further. As he states in his aforementioned book, virtual reality is genuine reality, and they can be even first-class realities. He also claimed that reflection on virtual reality technology can help us respond to the problem of the external world. In trying to prove this, he says that even if we truly are in a simulation, objects like tables and chairs are not illusions, but perfectly real objects. They are digital objects that are made of bits. Here he also notes that this leads us to what is sometimes called in modern physics the it from bit hypothesis. Physical objects are real and they are digital. However, someone could reasonably ask Chalmers, on what basis can we talk about simulation and realness or real objects in a single sentence? What then does the concept of simulation even mean? What does it stand for? If everything is real, there is no need to simulate anything, right? But on the other hand, Chalmers is absolutely right in noting the fact that our understanding of reality, including our understanding of the simulational layer that surrounds it, is intimately related to what we could, in the most general sense, call our scientific and technological knowledge. As that knowledge changes, our reality inevitably follows suit. Actually, the very idea that we may be living inside of a computer simulation is also in large part determined precisely by the newly emerging scientific knowledge and technological capabilities, as well as our conceptions and considerations of various existential possibilities of reality based on that knowledge and those capabilities. And finally, we may ask ourselves, what does this latter insight, one that goes beyond the question of computer simulation and returns us to the more general question of the realness of reality, from which I begin this talk actually, tell us about the desire to find ultimate truths, to create perfect ideals and flawless idealities that is so characteristic of the transhumanist project, or at least of classical transhumanism. Is this not a promise to liberate us from that simulated layer of reality, or from that desert-like mirage in which we exist? On one hand, the comprehended mirage of reality always appears to us as a sort of an unknowable threat. Yet, on the other hand, it is the driving force behind our pursuit of an ultimate form of reality and ourselves. Considering that no simulation can exist without an object to be simulated, it would seem that we have always been and always will be condemned to search for this metaphysical object that both terrifies and enchants us, the real reality. And yet, considering that our very knowledge, historically fluid, by the way, shapes our understanding of this object and the way it is manifested, it would also seem that we are doomed to seek it endlessly, never actually finding it. However, I think that this failure, if we can even call it so, is in fact a positive one, as it opens for us ever new existential possibilities. And in my opinion, our transhumanism is primarily about it. So today, we possibly exist in a computer simulation. But until recently, this simply haven't been, right? So I think it is not the end, but I know very well that it has to be the end of my talk now. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marius. In the last 10 minutes of the panel, I'm not sure. I was chatting with Evie in saying that if she'd like, she could use the last 10 minutes of the panel to go back to the slides in her presentation and just cover like some of the main points since they weren't working when she was reading her presentation. But I'm not sure where that stands, but in the meantime, like if Are there any questions about the presentations? Any comments? Yeah. Stefan?
Yeah, great presentations, all three of them. Abby, I was here because you addressed also the issue concerning nihilism and in the movies. Could you say, was there any movie where nihilism was presented in a positive and an affirmative way, and how would you then how do you think one could characterize nihilism in these movies?
Well, I think that it can have some positive variations. For example, when, sorry, I'm hearing everything loudly here. I mean, I mentioned it for Mad Max first, didn't I? Yes. When the protagonist realizes that nothing is left of what he knew, this nihilism is, and decides that there will not ever exist anything that will be the same. It also gives him power to fight. I mean that nihilism can become a positive power in a lot of similar films. We can see it in Terminator 2 also. We can, from every aspect, there is nihilism at the beginning of the story, but not a nihilism that makes you quit and retire, but a nihilism that makes you move on. It's like saying, well, I leave everything behind and I go on. I have not only to survive, but also to thrive in the future, and create something from zero. This is how I read such films and science fiction comics.
You then think one transcends nihilism, or is that still within the boundaries of nihilism?
Yes, I believe we're to the point now. No, the hero transcends nihilism, goes through nihilism and transcends it, and it's been transformed through it. It's been reborn. That's why something that I didn't have the time to refer to, I can see the notion of twist here, the notion of your own word. There is a twist in the messages in all movies. While most of them are created during postmodernity, during the postmodern period, they have moved on. They have already moved on, and the ideas in each film or each graphic novel are not related to the postmodern palimpsest anymore. It is not just a combination of things thrown into a pot, but they're woven together. What happens now in the present is woven with the past to move on, to surpass nihilism and be in the state of becoming. They are the first heroes in movies or books that realize this continuous becoming, I believe. That's why I respect science fiction so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I'm looking at the live stream. There are no questions from the audience. Okay. All right. Well, then we will resume with panel 3 at 5 till the hour. The first presentation will be Neil and Yana's presentation on our cartography of India's Thar Desert. Okay, we will see you then.